In April of 2023, I handed in my notice to quit my job at a very good management consulting firm in London. It looked quite crazy from the outside. I was working in central London, I was working with very smart people at a company that had a really good brand name. I'm paid well, my CV looks good, and my future also looks pretty bright. So why did I quit? And looking back, how does it feel like after 6 months? So before we dive right in, here's a bit of context about who I am. So I'm from Hong Kong. I was born and raised there for the first 18 years of my life. And then I moved to the UK to go to law school. I went to a really good law school, but during my time in law school, I realized that I didn't really like law. It's not really about the content, but I did try some work experience in some law firms, and I realized they were quite rigid and not really something that I wanted to pursue. So I looked for something that's similar, and I ended up in consulting instead. I basically spent about a year and a half just solely focusing on aiming to get into a top consulting firm, because at that point I didn't really have any experience in like finance, M&A or consulting. I had like one law internship, so I knew I had to work really hard. And I remember the day when I took like a 5-hour train to London to do my final round interview, and I walked out of the office in central London with a champagne in hand and an offer of a job. That was genuinely one of the happiest days in my life. I felt like all my life misery will be gone by then, and then I have like a super bright future and my life is set. But surprise, life doesn't work that way. And 2 years later, after working there for about a year, I decided to quit. So let's talk about why I quit. The first 4 to 6 months is basically like your honeymoon period. I was, dressing nice, going into central London, working, alongside all the other consultants, bankers and lawyers. I feel like I'm someone big, I feel like I'm in suits. And it was great. I joined alongside a dozen people in my age from top universities, Oxford, Cambridge, you name it. And we were all young, we were all like energetic, smart, and it was really fun. But around the 6 months mark, I realized I started to adapt to these, you can say like nice perks and these surface level things of the job. And I started to really see the job for what it is. So around the 6 month mark, I started to, feel a bit unease about me being in this place. I started to notice problems and things I didn't like about the job. And eventually, after 6 more months, I decided to quit. And there's a few main reasons why I quit. Firstly is I feel like I'm not really driving any impact in my job. If you know consulting is basically the business of advisory. You're advising your clients, often big companies with loads of money, on what they should do with their company, basically. So here I am, a 20-odd-year-old, doing these 4 to 6 weeks project. Each project is with a different company in a different industry, which is very fun. But I have to pretend like I know a lot about the industry and the company, and I just don't feel like the work that I'm doing does actually drive a lot of value. For example, one of my last projects before I quit was working with a private equity. Private equity is basically companies that have loads of money and they buy up other companies. I work with a really big private equity to analyze whether they should buy out this cell manufacturing company. And the project was 4 weeks long. Now, science was my worst subject in school. I have no interest in science whatsoever. I don't care about like biology, physics, chemistry, and I have no prior experience in cell manufacturing or cancer or anything like that. However, I am here doing like a 4-week project where I have to get up to speed and deliver a verdict on whether we believe that this is an investment that they should make. Secondly, I feel really replaceable. Now, before I joined consulting, I thought this job would be sort of really creative. I know that sounds quite naive now, but I thought it'd be really creative with a lot of space for problem solving. But in reality, you realize that as a really junior person, you're really there to execute. You're there to make pretty PowerPoint slides, you're there to build up some Excel model. And that made me realize I'm not really building my own expertise, and I am doing the same thing that the person next to me can do as well. It also didn't help that the market was basically in a really bad space at the time, and we were seeing quite massive layoff within the industry, not just in my firm. So those are the main reasons why I quit. But still, quitting without another job lined up or a clear plan is quite crazy. So how did I justify doing that? At the time, I was quite interested in doing something entrepreneurial. So perhaps joining a startup or trying to build some side business or a startup on my own. So my decision was basically between staying at the job, joining a startup, or quitting my job and starting something entrepreneurial on the side by myself. There's this analogy by Jeff Bezos, which is the one-way door and two-way door analogy. When you make a decision, there are two types of decisions. Firstly are one-way doors, which are doors that you can open, go through, and once you close it, you can't go back. On the other hand, there are two-way doors, which are doors that you can go in, have a look, walk around, and if you don't like it, you can always turn back, open it up, and go back. So this is basically about whether a decision is easily reversible. Now, when I think of doing something entrepreneurial, and after speaking to so many people, I realize it is more of a two-way door scenario. So I can open the door, go in, try something entrepreneurial on my own, and if it doesn't work, I can turn back, go back to consulting or join another startup. And that's really the main decision on why I decided to quit without a plan. Because I knew that I have enough savings, I have enough time, I'm really young. This is probably the time where the opportunity cost to do something crazy is the lowest. So let's talk about the initial phases after I quit. In the first month or two, it felt really crazy because I was removed from the routine of having a job and having that sort of stable income. To be honest, I didn't really have a very concrete plan for when I quit. I knew I wanted to try something entrepreneurial. I knew I wanted to try a bunch of stuff. A good way to put it is something I read in the book, The Pathless Path by Paul Millett. There's two types of freedom. Freedom from something and freedom to do something. So I like the freedom from consulting, but not really the freedom to do something else. So I had to figure out that part by myself. So I did plan something for the next few months, which is to actually learn coding, to code with AI, and to build some small scale startup projects. It was really fun for the first month or so because I felt like I was learning. There wasn't really a lot on the line, but slowly and slowly I started experiencing more and more mental stress and anxiety. And that's mostly from the fact that I don't have a stable paycheck coming in. Now, before I quit my job, I had a pretty good safety net, pretty good savings that could last for a year or so. So rationally speaking, I have enough saved up so that I don't need to do anything and I can still survive for a year. But mentally and emotionally, knowing that there's this looming deadline at the end of the 12-month period is so scary, and that's something that I didn't really realize at the time. Because of that looming deadline, I basically pushed myself to learn coding quicker and quicker. And I think around month 3 or so, I actually started building projects with the hope to eventually monetize them. I actually documented most of the process on my channel here. So if you go back like 2-3 months, you'll see a ton of startup vlogs where I was basically building stuff, trying it out with friends, and it was really fun, but also really stressful. And that leads to another thing I learned from the last few months. Even though I have enough saved up, but because I don't have money coming in, I had to turn the priority of these projects into making money as soon as possible, rather than building something substantially up and then trying to think about the long term. I'm not saying that's bad, but that became quite a short-sighted way to think about these startup projects. So in this period, I built a lot of stuff. I worked on a social app idea called Matcha, which I worked on with 2 other friends. That didn't really work out. And then I worked on a productivity app called LiveXP, which I also decided to quit on. And I also worked on this consulting AI tool called CaseFast, which is luckily still going. But this is also the period where I felt the most lost, because no one was telling me whether I was doing a good job or not. No one was telling me whether the signals I'm experiencing, like the startup not working, are they positive or negative. No one's telling me whether I'm going in the right direction in the long term. This is also the time where I realized that the time that I have and the progress on my startup doesn't scale linearly. So back when I was in consulting, say I was doing maybe an hour a day of work on my startup. Now that I have 8 hours a day, my output doesn't just suddenly go up by 8-fold. So yeah, in that period, I was really lost. I was experiencing a lot of failure, my progress was sort of slowing down, and I was also really stressful because, I was running out of time, even though I still have many months of savings. This is where I experienced an unexpected encounter. So I have a good friend, and one day he suddenly just told me about this random opportunity, which is that the Financial Times and Google was looking for someone to do a short-term consulting project. Now, initially, I didn't really want to do it because I didn't want to go back into consulting. But first of all, it was only 2 months, and the first month was part-time. Secondly, it pays really well because it's a contractor short-term role. It pays even higher than average consulting pay, which is already really good. And lastly, it's with Google and Financial Times, which I thought are a really cool company to be working with. So I thought, why not? I'll at least go interview with them, speak with them, and see what it's like. And the whole process was really smooth. I got in within like a week or 2. And so here I am, starting another consulting gig, but this time only for 2 months. I didn't really have any expectation. My only aim for doing the project at the time was really just to extend my runway, meaning my savings, by a few more months. And then also hoping to work on my startups whilst I'm not working on the consulting project. And also another reason why I took the project was because they were gonna fly me out to Taiwan, which means that I can also visit Hong Kong, which is where my families are, before flying back to London. So initially I didn't really have a lot of expectations on the project, but once I started the project, I started noticing a few things. First of all, my mental state and my stress level between having a paycheck and not having a paycheck. Remember I said just now that how much more stressful it is when you are not getting paid on a regular basis. I actually didn't really felt the difference as much before I started this 2-month consulting project, but after I started it and getting paid regularly again, I can really felt the acute differences between my stress level for when I'm getting paid every month versus not getting paid at all, even though I have 12 months of saving. And this is such an important point I want to stress, because even though you might have money saved up, even though rationally you might think that, oh, it's okay, if none of this work out, then I'll just go back to do something else. In my experience, sort of having that regular paycheck come in actually helps me work on my startup a lot healthier, because I don't have to think about these projects in a short-sighted way, thinking about how they must make money within like a month or two, but instead I can think more about the long term. Where do I want to take this in a year or two? And the second thing I learned was just a confirmation on the fact that I don't like consulting that much. The first consulting firm I worked for is quite different from this project, which is with Financial Times and Google. But still, I realized that I don't like consulting because I think that I'm not driving too much impact. It's more talk than actually implementation. And that's something good to confirm, right? Because I want to make sure that I really don't like the industry before fully stepping out of it. But the most important thing is sort of getting back into that routine and having that regular paycheck for 2 months. I was able to free up a lot more mental energy to think about where I want to take my startup, to think about what I want to do in the future. So that brings us to today. I wrapped up my consulting project in Taipei around 2-3 weeks ago, and I've since flew back to Hong Kong, and I'm going back to London in a month. So do I regret quitting my job 6 months ago? The answer is a very solid no. I'm actually so glad that I quit my consulting job 6 months ago, because the amount of things that I learned, not just in terms of skill sets, but also in terms of my own understanding of myself, what I like, what my strengths are, what my weaknesses are, is so much better after these 6 months. If I had stayed in consulting, if I stayed in the same environment, I would never be able to learn these things about myself. Do I want to keep working on the startup? Yes, but my thinking is that I want to turn it into a side hustle again. Another side story to the 6 months is that other than my startup, I've also been putting a lot more stress on myself for making this YouTube channel work. Now, I started making a bit of money on this channel before I quit my job, and I started getting people reaching out for sponsorship deals, which is why I started turning this into more of a business. And again, like I said with my startup, that meant that because I'm not getting paid, the priority for this channel also shifted from, just having fun, delivering value, into a channel where I'm trying to make money from the get-go. And that didn't feel too good. I wasn't really enjoying myself making content anymore. I was stressing myself with deadlines, and I didn't like that. What I learned working on the 2-month short-term consulting gig was that I thrive a lot more with that regular paycheck coming in, and then on the side working on projects that I can see myself working on in the long term. If I never tried it, I never would have known a lot of the stuff that I learned on this journey. For example, I didn't particularly like coding. I didn't like getting into the nitty-gritty of the stuff. I'm more a marketer, the person that communicates and speaks to the customers. And these things are just things I never would have learned unless I tried becoming the coder myself. So I'm also super grateful for that. If you're someone watching that wants to quit your job to pursue something entrepreneurial or pursue your own dream, whether you want to become like a musician, an artist, a startup founder, these are probably the tips that I would give you from the 6 months that I experienced. Firstly, be okay with uncertainty. In the first month or two, I was really keen to make sure that there's no uncertainty at all. I was very keen to make sure that I have a very clear plan of the next 12 months. But what I realized is that when you're on this path, on the pathless path, as Paul Miller would say, you have to embrace the uncertainty, because that's where the magic happens. I never would have guessed that I would get this 2 months opportunity. I never would have guessed that I would meet so many cool people that are in the startup industry. I never would have guessed when I quit my job in April that in November I will be in Taiwan and then back in Hong Kong. All these uncertainties are part of the path that you have chosen, and you really just have to embrace it. I'll probably make another video talking more about like things that I wish I knew, or things that I think are helpful for people wanting to get on this path. And if you have any questions, as always, please comment down below, because you know, I did this not just for myself. I now know a lot of stuff that I didn't know. So if you want to do something similar, I'm sure there's a lot that I can help with. Not in like a braggy way, but in terms of like, hey, let me help you out. Let me tell you what I know. But yeah, it's been a crazy journey, and I can't wait to make videos again. I can't wait to keep going. And with that being said, it's getting dark in Hong Kong, but I'll see you very soon. Take care. Bye.